Hey guys, tonight we're trudging, quite literally, into one of the soggiest, muddiest, most underwhelming slices of history imaginable. How medieval serfs coped with freezing rain and the dreaded mud season. You wake up, the wind is howling outside, the fires burn down to a cough of embers, and the first thing your foot finds is a puddle of icy water that seeped through the wall during the night. You pull the scratchy wool blanket tighter, but it smells like mildew and goat. And yes, you're going to work today because day off is a concept you will not meet for another few hundred years. You probably won't survive this, but you'll definitely get wet. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and what time you're listening to this. I'm always curious where in the world people are drifting off from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It begins with your eyelids cracking open in a one-room hut so dark and so damp, you're not sure if you slept or just blinked slowly all night. The thatched roof has leaked again. The corner where someone swore they'd patched it with sheep wool is now a miniature swamp, complete with buzzing insects. The dirt floor, no, it's not just a metaphor, is squelching underfoot. There's no coffee. There's no light switch. The air smells like smoke, mold, and whatever your cousin ate last night and then regretted. Your bed? A sack of straw, flattened to pancake level from the weight of 2 generations of your family, plus a cat that may or may not belong to you. The blankets are thick woven wool, but they're perpetually damp, because everything is perpetually damp. Even your thoughts feel a little moldy. Outside, it's that kind of rain that doesn't fall. It just sort of exists, hanging in the air and settling on everything with slow, soggy intent. You step into it like wading into lukewarm soup. Welcome to mud season. Historians still argue whether medieval Europeans had specific words for this time of year. Most records simply blur together autumn and early spring as those weeks when no one stops sneezing. But for the peasants, your class, it's unmistakable. Your boots sink, your fingers freeze, and your chores somehow double. Your first task, not falling flat on your face while navigating the ankle-deep sludge that leads to the animal pen. The mud is so thick you wonder if the earth itself is trying to drag you back in. Your neighbor's son lost a sandal in this same patch last week. The sandal is gone forever now. We hold a brief moment of silence for it. You carry a bucket, which was once shaped like a bucket but is now more like a squishy oval held together by string and prayer. Water must be fetched from the stream. You've been warned, don't drink from the standing puddles unless you enjoy hallucinating frogs with human voices. You don't. As you trudge, you notice old Gertie down the path has constructed some sort of makeshift walkway using flat stones and broken cartwheels. Clever. She'll be dead of exposure by February, but still points for effort. You pass your lord's manor, or at least you imagine it's somewhere behind that wall of fog and disdain. They're warm. They're dry. They have socks. You remind yourself that envy is a sin, and immediately feel worse for also wanting their leftover meat pies. You arrive at the pig pen. The pigs are somehow cleaner than you. They snort in amusement. You feel judged. You muck the pen, a task that involves balancing a shovel, a rake, and your last shred of dignity. It's not going well. The mud here has personality, slippery, malicious, and with a habit of splashing directly into your mouth when you least expect it. Bonus, one pig is in heat and very, very affectionate today. The chickens refuse to come out. You can't blame them. Back inside the hut, breakfast is a slurry of barley, water, and hope. It's called pottage. Some mornings you add cabbage. Other mornings, it's just very well steeped cabbage water pretending to be soup. Today, it tastes like yesterday's socks, which, incidentally, might be in there. You don't ask. One of the kids starts crying. Your grandmother is muttering Latin under her breath. Not prayers, just her memories of church school from 80 years ago. You think she's casting a curse on the rain itself. Honestly, you respect that. Somehow, this is your normal. Not the plague. Not the war. Just Moisture. Persistent, morale-destroying moisture that creeps under your nails, through the thatch, into your soul. Historians often debate whether medieval peasants had a concept of weather depression. They probably didn't call it that, but the thousand-yard stare as you chew week-old turnip stew suggests they knew something was off. And this isn't even winter. This is just the opening act. Mud season is the cruel warm-up, the wet prelude to snowed-in suffering. You begin preparing for that too, stacking logs, patching clothing, sharpening tools that will rust again in 24 hours. The few joys? Maybe a neighbor drops by and shares news of someone in another village who saw a comet and is sure the world's ending. Or maybe someone finally figures out how to drywall over the fire without burning the house down. Either way, it's excitement. And yet you carry on, because you must, because your ancestors did. Because somewhere under all this grime and thatch and existential moisture, there is resilience. Or maybe it's just stubbornness. Hard to say. You sit on the edge of the bed, or rather the straw pile that performs bed-like duties, and begin wrapping your feet. Not in socks, because socks are for people with coin or favor. No, you reach for your trusty foot wraps, long strips of roughly woven cloth, once white, but now a kind of historical beige with smudges of everything you've walked through for the past 5 years. You wind them tightly around each foot, overlapping the fabric like sad bandages. They'll soak through by midday. They always do. But that's the ritual. You wrap, you tuck, you pray the corners don't fold under, and blister your soles by noon. Foot wraps are deceptively simple, and medieval peasants weren't alone in using them. Russian soldiers wore them in snow. Scandinavian farmers swore by them. And you just wish they didn't smell like fermented turnips. Then come a shoes. If you're lucky, they're made of stiff, cured leather with soles that sort of remember what it means to be waterproof. If you're less lucky, they're stitched together scraps stuffed with hay. Either way, there's no such thing as dry feet in your vocabulary. You will go to bed tonight with the same soggy squelch you woke up to. Congratulations. And you don't get to complain. Your cousin lost 2 toes last winter and still insists, through chattering teeth, that she's just fine. As you step outside again, the cold hits different now. It crawls up your legs through those wet wraps, settling in your bones like a tenant who doesn't pay rent and refuses to leave. Your breath puffs out invisible little ghosts, and your hands, wrapped in fingerless mittens, go stiff before the first chore is done. At least the mud is consistent. Mud season isn't just a mess. It's a way of life. There's no cobblestone here, no drainage ditches, just centuries of peasant feet compacting the earth into something between porridge and glue. Paths turn into bogs. Fields vanish underwater. Even the animals start walking in hesitant, soggy steps like they're questioning their own existence. You think about how some noble, probably wearing shoes that cost more than your entire family's livestock, once declared peasants simple but hardy. You wonder if he's ever tried to push a wheelbarrow through a foot of sticky brown sludge. Probably not. Historians still argue whether medieval serfs developed region-specific methods for dealing with these seasonal swamp conditions. Some say yes, that villagers adapted by raising pathways with straw and rotted wood. Others argue that most people just suffer through it and called it part of God's plan. You're leaning toward the suffering theory. Still, you learn tricks. You walk wide-footed, like a goose. You memorize which parts of the yard are firmer than others. And when it gets really bad, you do what everyone secretly does. You stay inside and pretend to be asleep until someone else volunteers to check on the goats. The inside isn't better, though. There's no chimney in your hut. The smoke from the cooking fire lingers at head height, giving everything a gentle, choking haze. Soot crusts the beams. Your eyes burn. But at least it's warmer than outside. And luxury of luxuries, you have a seat near the fire, which currently crackles weakly under a stack of damp birch logs that hiss more than burn. Next to you, someone coughs. Not the gentle kind, either. The deep, wheezing rattle of a chest cold made worse by weeks of wet clothing and poor nutrition. You pass them a cloth rag, your version of a tissue, and wonder how many others are sick. You lose count after 5. To distract yourself, you glance down at your wraps. They're already dirty again. Bits of straw cling to the edges. You swear one of the pigs gave you a look this morning that said, "Nice outfit." You think briefly about what people in the future might wear. Would they have waterproof boots? Heated floors? Magical weatherproof suits? Would they still wrap their feet in cloth and call it progress? You chuckle, then cough, then get handed the rag back. Your job this afternoon: help patch the southern wall of the hut, where a particularly aggressive rainstorm last week created a hole large enough for the neighbor's goose to walk through twice. This is where you get creative. You mix clay, straw, some horse dung, sorry, but it works, and pack it between sticks to rebuild the wall. It's called wattle and daub, and it's ancient. Quirky fact: some structures built this way have stood for hundreds of years if left undisturbed. Yours will probably last until the next mule bumps into it. But as you slap handfuls of the stuff into place, the smell rises. Earthy, sharp, vaguely offensive. You gag. Someone tells you to toughen up. You fantasize about pelting them with daub. Instead, you smile and keep working. Through it all, life pulses on. A girl sings a repetitive little rhyme about ducks and mud. Someone's attempting to dry socks over the fire again. Don't look directly at the steam rising from them unless you want to cry. And outside, the rain shifts from drizzle to downpour. Again. By nightfall, you're wet again. You're always wet. You strip your foot wraps, hang them by the fire, and put on your sleeping pair, slightly less damp but definitely more smelly. You settle onto the straw, pull the damp blanket over your chin, and close your eyes. Just as sleep begins to settle, the wind rattles the door. A drop of water leaks through the roof, lands directly on your forehead, and you sigh into the dark. Mud season never really lets you forget who's in charge. The pigs are snoring again. Not softly, not politely. No, this is full-throated nasal hurricane territory, echoing off the low ceiling beams and mingling with the sound of the fire sputtering its last damp gasp. You roll over, but it's no use. You're awake, and so are your roommates. Because yes, your roommates include 3 pigs, a chicken with boundary issues, and a goat that may or may not be house-trained. It's not that you want to live with farm animals. It's that the animals, like you, don't particularly thrive outside in the freezing mud. You know thatched roofs leak. You know wind can snap wooden pins like twigs. So when the first truly miserable rains came, weeks ago, you moved everyone inside. That includes pigs, geese, chickens, and sometimes, if she's bored, the neighbor's cow. Her name is Lettuce. To be fair, the animals do bring a kind of comfort. They're warm. They radiate body heat in a way that's weirdly cozy when you're huddled in the corner trying to remember what it felt like to have toast. The pigs especially, they're like small, flatulent heaters with hoofs. Historians still debate whether medieval peasants frequently brought livestock into their homes during cold, wet months. Archaeological digs show traces of manure and animal bedding in domestic huts, but some argue it might be due to collapsed barns or poor excavation methods. You, however, are living proof. It is absolutely intentional and necessary. There's even a kind of logic to it. The animals survive, which means milk, meat, and manure keep flowing. You survive, which means you're alive to give a portion of all that to the Lord come spring. Everyone wins, except your nose. The smell is, well, indescribable. It's a heady mix of wet fur, manure, sour hay smoke, and the constant undercurrent of, I forgot what clean air is. You get used to it, though. Or you just forget what not living in a barn is like. The chicken, whom someone has optimistically named Featherina, has taken a liking to your bed. She flaps indignantly whenever you shift, pecks your head if you get too close, and lays eggs in your blanket. Honestly, you respect her hustle. During daylight hours, the human-animal boundary becomes a bit clearer. You try to herd the pigs outside to root around in the least soggy patch of ground. But they're not dumb. They know better than to leave the warm hovel for a swamp buffet. One particularly obstinate sow sits squarely in the doorway, daring you to move her. You do not. Eventually, someone lures them out with grain, and for a few golden hours, your hut is quieter, less warm, but slightly less chaotic. This is when you do your chores that require minimal pig interference, like mending a tunic, or preparing the evening pottage, or scrubbing your face with a wet cloth and pretending it's a bath. You wring out your foot wraps and hang them up, even though nothing ever really dries in this season. And then, inevitably, the animals come back in. It's like watching the tide roll in, hooved, cloven, and snorting. The pigs snuffle back in first, shaking off mud like living mops. The chicken flies directly into her designated bed zone. The goat does a small, celebratory leap and proceeds to eat a piece of the wall. You say, dinner is almost ready, a thin stew made from barley, onions, and what might be turnip, though its identity has become ambiguous in the boil. You add a dash of old bacon grease for flavor. The pot hangs over the fire, occasionally spitting droplets onto the logs with a hiss. Your uncle, who hasn't spoken all day, suddenly declares the stew acceptable. This is high praise. He's usually asleep by now, his beard rising and falling in perfect rhythm with the pig's snores. For a moment, there's something resembling peace. And then Featherina squawks, launching herself into the air and landing squarely in the stew pot. Dinner is delayed. Again. You fish her out, no worse for wear, just mildly steamed, and set the pot back in place. Someone offers to sing a song while it reheats. It's a local melody, mostly about mud and the futility of ambition. You all hum along. It's weirdly soothing. These nights are long, wet, and filled with minor chaos. But they're also oddly intimate. You know every rustle, every animal sneeze, every creak of the wood. There's a rhythm to it all. Wake, work, dry what you can, rewrap, herd the pigs, scoop the stew, repeat. There's a whispered story passed between families that if you talk nicely to the pigs during the coldest months, they'll remember your kindness and not eat your face if you die in your sleep. You laugh at the idea, but you also catch yourself saying good night to them just in case. Historians rarely write about this part of peasant life. The damp, smelly, strangely cozy animal-sharing lifestyle doesn't make for glorious manuscripts, but it was real. It was daily, and for many people, your ancestors included, it was just how life worked. You douse the fire until it's just glowing embers. Someone sneezes. The goat settles against the wall, chewing something that may or may not have been your sock. And the chicken has returned to her post. You roll over, close your eyes, and accept the sounds, the smells, the shuffle of hooves and tails and wings around you. It's not peace, but it's survival. The rain has a personality tonight. It doesn't fall. It lashes, scraping sideways across your hut with the angry rhythm of a blacksmith banging on a warped pan. You're awake again, barely 2 hours after drifting off, because the roof is leaking in 3 new places. One of them, of course, is directly over your face. You shuffle up from the straw, pulling the blanket around your shoulders like a medieval cape of damp despair. You scan the ceiling. It's thatched bundles of straw layered tight, angled to slough off water, at least in theory. But the thatch is old. It sags. It leaks. You say. The family patched the roof a few weeks ago, stuffing moss into the worst spots. For a glorious 2 days, it almost worked. Now the moss is rotted and is slowly dissolving into the soup pot on the hearth. Extra flavor, if nothing else. Your job tonight, reinforce the worst leak before the fire goes out. You fetch a wooden stool, set it carefully atop a log, because the floor is too muddy to be trusted, and climb up. The wind howls. The hut creaks like it's considering retirement. You stuff fresh straw into the thatch and press it down with a flat palm. Water still drips through, though now it's a slower drip. Victory. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants routinely replaced entire roofs or just patched them endlessly. Some evidence from rural England suggests that full rethatching happened every 20 years or so, meaning most people lived under half-rotted straw most of the time. Others argue that smaller, frequent patching was more realistic for the poor. Either way, your ceiling is one stiff gust away from joining you in bed. Down below, someone's moved the pig bucket under one of the other leaks. It's half full now. The pigs, ever optimistic, think it's dinner. In the morning, the roof sags noticeably in the middle. You try not to look at it. Looking makes it real. You gather the tools, a pitchfork for fluffing, a curved hook for pulling, and a bundle of fresh straw harvested from the slightly drier part of the haystack. As you climb up, you realize with icy clarity that this roof has always been slightly uneven. And today, the slope leads directly to you. You balance awkwardly, praying to every saint you can remember that you won't slide off the side like a muddy pancake. The process is slow. You remove the rotted sag of straw and tuck in new bundles, overlapping them like scale armor. It's itchy work. The straw gets down your tunic, up your sleeves, even inside your mouth when the wind kicks. Someone from below shouts helpful advice like, "Don't fall," and that part's still leaking. "Thank you, cousin." Extremely useful. One particularly miserable moment involves a large spider making eye contact with you from the bundle you're stuffing. You blink. It blinks back. You both decide to pretend the other doesn't exist. Eventually, the patch is done. You climb down, covered in straw, sweat, and at least 3 insect bites. You look up proudly, just as a fresh gust of wind dislodges a bundle and sends it tumbling into the pig pen. The pigs cheer. Inside, you wipe your face with a cloth that might have once been a shirt. The fire is burning low. You throw on more wood and sit close enough that the heat reaches your face, but not your feet. Nothing ever reaches your feet. Still, this is one of the rare moments you almost feel content. The hut is holding for now. The pigs are quiet. Even Featherina has taken a nap instead of a bath in your water bucket. You savor it. Then someone mentions mold. Yes, mold. It's not just a smell anymore. It's a presence. A green-gray bloom in the corner by the back wall. You prod it with a stick. It wobbles ominously. Mold is everywhere during mud season. It creeps in through walls, grows in the straw, colonizes your socks. It's fuzzy, determined, and somehow always damp. Some folks believe it's harmless, just another part of life. Others swear it causes madness. You're undecided but itchy. Quirky fact: some medieval remedies suggested burning rosemary or thyme to purify the air. You try it once. The rosemary smells nice. The pig sneezes. The mold stays. You dig out some dried herbs and hang them above the mold patch anyway. At the very least, it looks like you're trying. And in peasant life, looking busy is half the battle. Later that day, you visit your neighbor Gertie's hut. She's famous for her roof. It doesn't leak. How, you ask with awe. She shrugs. Married a roofer. You nod solemnly. Powerful life choices. Her thatch is layered tight, edged with woven reeds, and somehow reinforced with an old fishing net. She offers you a cup of thin ale and lets you touch her ceiling. It feels sacred. Historians occasionally mention that some communities used clay tiles or wooden shingles, luxuries for the upper class or well-positioned tradesfolk. For you, and for most, it's straw or bust. On the walk home, the rain starts again. You look up at the clouds, thick, gray, and swirling like dirty wool, and wonder if the sun is still out there. You trip twice, lose one shoe briefly to a puddle, and arrive back soaked. But the hut still stands. The roof still holds. And inside, it's only slightly damper than outside. The pig bucket is overflowing. The stew pot smells like mushrooms and regret. But the fire's burning strong, and the roof isn't currently dripping on your forehead. That's enough, you think. That's good. You lie back on your straw mattress, shift your head slightly away from a suspicious dark patch overhead, and close your eyes. A single drop of water falls. It lands 2 inches to your left. Close call. The morning air smells like wet cabbage and burnt porridge. You're not sure which came first, the smell or the hunger, but both hit you before your feet touch the mud floor. Someone has already started breakfast, which in your world means someone has stirred yesterday's barley sludge and added just enough water to make it technically edible again. It's called pottage, and it's what's for breakfast. Also lunch, and sometimes dinner. Always slightly different, always slightly worse. You shuffle over to the fire, where the pot hangs on its creaky iron hook. Inside is a thick grayish mass, steaming gently. You lean in, take a whiff, and immediately regret it. Still, food is food. Pottage was the great equalizer of the medieval peasantry, because no matter how rich or poor your village was, this stuff showed up on the table. A mix of grains, root vegetables, whatever herbs you could forage, and occasionally, very occasionally, bits of meat or bone. You ladle some into a wooden bowl. The consistency is halfway between glue and regret. It jiggles slightly. You eat it anyway. Historians still argue whether this near-constant diet of porridge and stews provided enough nutrients for peasants. Some say yes, the mix of grains and seasonal vegetables cover the basics. Others point to skeletal remains showing signs of malnutrition, rickets, and scurvy. You don't need bones to tell you that this stuff tastes like punishment. Quirky fact: in some regions, peasants used fermented cabbage juice to flavor their stews. It added a tangy kick and apparently kept the neighbors from visiting too often. You glance at the corner where a cracked pot holds this exact juice. It's alive. You put the lid back on. Today's meal includes turnip, barley, and possibly something green that may have once been nettle. There's a slice of dried onion on top fancy. You eat slowly, savoring the warmth more than the flavor. Outside, the wind is howling again, and your bones are already bracing for a cold walk. But the hot food spreads a little heat through your chest and out toward your fingers. It's something. Later in the day, you help stir up a new batch for supper. The rule is simple. Whatever's not moldy goes in the pot. A carrot stump here, a chunk of old bread there. You even find a sliver of smoked pork score. You drop it in ceremoniously. It immediately sinks and disappears forever. The stew cooks slowly over the open fire, bubbles forming like ancient bog gas. Someone adds a clove of garlic, and the hut erupts in excited murmurs. Garlic is gold. Garlic is currency. Garlic means tonight you feast. Except feast is a generous term. By early evening, the stew is ready. The smell isn't bad, earthy, hearty, vaguely hopeful. Everyone gathers around with bowls. The portions are fair, if small. You sip, chew, swallow, and find yourself smiling just a little. Then someone crunches down on a mystery object and quietly excuses themselves. You finish your bowl and rinse it in the water bucket by the door. The chicken tries to jump in again. You gently block her with your foot. Not tonight, Featherina. Let the soup rest in peace. Dessert, if you're lucky, is a piece of dried apple or a slice of hard cheese older than your last haircut. You chew it slowly, thoughtfully, like a philosopher pondering life's mysteries. Namely, why cheese can taste both dusty and sharp at the same time. There's talk of baking bread this week, flatbread to be specific. Yeast is hard to come by, and ovens are a luxury few huts enjoy. Most bread is baked on hot stones or in shared village ovens. You remember the last loaf, dark, hard as your uncle's toenail, and suspiciously salty. Still, it filled your stomach and made an excellent doorstop afterward. Later, someone suggests making a treat for the upcoming saint's feast. A honey cake. You all laugh. No one's seen honey in months. The last bees packed up and left during the frost. Still, the idea lingers, something sweet, something festive. It reminds you that food isn't just fuel here. It's hope. It's ritual. It's the difference between a long night and a bearable one. You recall a time last winter when someone snuck a handful of crushed nuts into the stew. The crunch surprised you so much you thought you'd lost a tooth. But the flavor, warm, buttery, unexpected, made the whole week feel lighter. Food is memory here. Even the bland, watery stuff. And while you may grumble and sigh at the endless pottage and pickled greens, you know it's what keeps you upright. The turnips, the barley, the cabbage juice that probably has sentience, it's all part of the rhythm. The glue that binds your survival. You scoop the last bit of stew from the pot, scraping the sides for good measure. The fire has burned low again, and the night air pushes in through the cracks like a stray cat looking for trouble. You lie back down, belly not quite full, but not empty either. A soft burp from one of the pigs. A creak of wind in the thatch. The smell of turnips and old socks lingers, but you're too tired to care. You close your eyes and let the warmth from the stew carry you, just a little, into the mud-soaked dreamscape of medieval sleep. You're lying there, eyes half closed, listening to the wind scrape past your hut like it's sharpening a knife on the roof beams. The fire has faded to a faint orange glow, and the air feels heavy with damp wood smoke and pig breath. You think maybe, just maybe, you'll fall asleep without an eruption. And then it hits you. A splat, right on the cheek. It's mud. Glorious, wet, cold mud. You jolt upright. Across the room, your cousin is doubled over in silent laughter. She points toward the door where two teenagers, cloaked in rain-soaked rags, are ducking out into the night. Mud fights. Again. It's unofficial tradition. When the fields are too wet to work and everyone's too stir-crazy to sit still, the younger serfs start chucking whatever is closest and squishiest at each other. Usually mud. Sometimes manure. Occasionally, a rotten turnip if tensions escalate. You wipe your face with the hem of your tunic and sigh. Mud season has its own rules of engagement. Earlier in the day, you try to take a short walk between chores. Nothing major, just a stroll along the edge of the field, where the ground might be slightly firmer. It was not. You sank to your knees within 10 steps and had to be rescued by an 8-year-old wielding a crooked stick and a strong sense of superiority. That's the thing. When everything is drenched, everything becomes a game. You either laugh through it or start weeping into your pottage. One kid in the village, nimble and full of mischief, has constructed what can only be described as a mudslide. He's cleared a slope behind the barn and coated it with enough wet clay to make pottery jealous. People are lining up to throw themselves down it, shrieking and flailing. You shake your head, but also it looks fun. Historians still debate whether medieval peasants found joy in moments like these, or whether it's just wishful thinking layered onto grim realities. But between the dung fights and improvised sledding, you're fairly confident some part of the medieval soul knew how to mess around. Later, you return to the hut, soaked and grinning, only to discover your cousin and a neighbor have started crafting mud dolls. Yes, dolls. Little figures shaped from thick clay and pebbles, with straw for hair and charcoal-smeared faces. They stand proudly on a flat stone near the fire, lined up like a tiny, judgmental audience. These are the nobility, your cousin explains with mock formality. They rule over the pig kingdom. You nod solemnly and give a short bow. The next morning, the pig kingdom is overthrown by a wayward chicken. Coup complete. These strange, ridiculous activities help fill the slow, sludgy hours between meals and chores. Mud football. Slippery tag. A game where you try to walk across the yard without losing a shoe. No one has won yet. There's even a song. A silly little rhyme passed from kid to kid. Mud on my boots, mud on my face. No sun in the sky, just slop every place. If I fall down, I'm not getting back. So please bring a rope or maybe a snack. You find yourself humming it while scrubbing mud off your tunic with a dull stick. It's catchy. And while yes, there's always the risk of stepping into something not entirely mud, thanks to the pigs, cows, and generous geese, you start to accept that dirt is just a part of you now. You are essentially 40% soil. Quirky fact: in some remote villages, mud was used to polish wood. That's right, after letting it dry and scraping it fine, they'd rub it on tools or furniture for a sort of prehistoric buffing. You consider trying it on your boots, then remember you haven't seen them under all the grime since October. Mud also becomes an informal currency. Someone trades a relatively dry patch of floor for an extra turnip. Another offers 10 minutes on the dry bench in exchange for a helping of stew. You watch these negotiations with quiet amusement and a slight longing for that dry bench. One evening, someone declares a mud creature contest. Participants have 1 hour to sculpt the most horrifying figure they can. You fashion something with 6 arms, goat horns, and pig tusks. You name it Lord Wetbottom. It wins. There's laughter. Real laughter. Snorts and wheezing. Even the old ones chuckle, which is as rare as a dry sock. Historians often overlook the silly, the absurd, the nonsense that bubbles up when humans are stuck in a wet box with each other for weeks. But it's here, and it matters. It keeps your spirits from sinking lower than your sandals. And sometimes, when the day ends and your tunic is more mud than cloth, you strip it off, hang it by the fire, and feel something close to accomplishment. You survived another day. You didn't cry when you slipped in the pig pen. You even won a mud contest. Life in this season isn't glorious. It isn't dry, but it has moments. And those moments pile up like patches of hay on the floor, uneven, scratchy, but warm enough. You wrap yourself in a not quite clean blanket, lie back and stare at the ceiling, where your mud sculpture now casts a strange, flickering shadow in the firelight. You smile. The wind knocks against the door again. The chicken flaps her wings. Someone farts unashamedly. You fall asleep with mud in your fingernails and laughter in your belly. You wake to the unmistakable sound of suction. Not the helpful kind, like someone drawing water from a well, but the muddy, soul-sapping slurp of your foot being devoured by the earth. Again. You yank hard and free yourself, boot and all miraculous, honestly, that you've lost all feeling in your toes. The mud, as usual, is winning. Mud season has transformed every pathway, every open patch of ground, into a treacherous obstacle course. You don't walk anymore. You navigate. You plan routes like a commander on a battlefield, choosing your steps with precision and praying that nothing squishes in a way that implies hidden manure. The worst part isn't the cold or the wet. It's the uncertainty. What looks like solid earth may conceal a foot-deep pocket of sticky misery. And once you're in, you're in. Some say there's still a wheelbarrow stuck out back from 3 winters ago, waiting for a thaw that may never come. And that's how the mud shoes started. Technically, they're not shoes. They're desperate improvisations, flat wooden slats tied to your feet with twine and dried reeds, meant to distribute your weight and keep you from sinking too deep. Do they work? Debatable. Do they look ridiculous? Absolutely. But everyone's wearing some version now, and fashion has clearly given up. Historians still argue whether these kinds of peasant-engineered snowshoe alternatives were common or just isolated innovations. In some alpine communities, people really did develop crude overshoes to deal with winter muck. Other scholars believe most serfs just accepted the sink and kept walking. You're somewhere in the middle, experimenting, slipping, learning. You shuffle forward in your planks, arms out for balance, resembling a very determined duck. Across the village, Gertie has upgraded her version by nailing goat bones to the bottom of hers for traction. She moves like a nightmare ballerina. But she hasn't fallen yet, so maybe she's onto something. The children, of course, take this as inspiration. Within an hour, they've turned the whole thing into a competition. Who can build the fastest mud skates? Rules are loose. Judging is arbitrary. The winner gets the dry corner of the pig pen for a night. One boy manages to lash two pot lids to his feet, promptly slides directly into the compost pile. He's fine. His dignity? Less so. Back in your hut, you inspect your own mud soles. The wood's warped from yesterday's rain, and one of the leather ties is snapped. You fix it with twine, sigh, and mentally prepare for another day of slip dodging and toe freezing. Outside, you spot something incredible, a dry patch. Just 5 feet across. Maybe less, but it's solid. You feel it with the toe of your shoe. No squish, no squelch, just dirt. You step into it with reverence, like a pilgrim reaching a holy site. You savor it. A moment later, a goat steps in, poops, and moves on. So much for sacred ground. Later, you help your neighbor build a raised footpath using broken boards, old fence posts, and sheer determination. You hammer the stakes deep into the mud, lay planks across them, and walk its full length without sinking once. It feels like flying. You consider charging a toll, then remember no one has money. Still, it becomes the village favorite. People call it the bridge, even though it's only a foot off the ground and goes nowhere in particular. Someone decorates it with chicken feathers. Featherina is offended. This new path inspires more creativity. Soon, there are stepping stones made from flattened baskets. Someone repurposes a cracked door as a walkway. One family uses logs bound with rope, which bob ominously when stepped on but mostly hold together. You realize that in a season defined by slop, any sense of progress, however wobbly, is a minor miracle. Quirky fact: in parts of medieval Japan, wooden clogs called ghetto were used to keep feet elevated above dirt and mud. They looked a little like stilts, and similar concepts probably existed in bits and pieces across other rainy regions. You briefly fantasize about inventing peasant stilts, then remember your balance is terrible, and you like your knees unbroken. Later you fall. Not a dramatic, windmilling arm fall. Just one of those slow-motion, inevitable ones where your foot finds an invisible slick of goose droppings and mud. You go down. Not gracefully, but you manage to roll so your face lands in a relatively clean puddle. Small victories. Everyone pretends not to notice. That's the rule. You get up, dripping, dignity left behind like a dropped turnip. You trudge back to your hut, peel off your mud shoes, and wring out your tunic. Again. And yet, you're okay. You didn't sink permanently. You didn't lose a boot. You even helped build a bridge today. You dry your feet near the fire, sort of. You hold them out to the warmth and pretend they still have nerve endings. Your toes are pale, wrinkled, vaguely blue, but stubbornly still there. You pull on your nighttime foot wraps, curl up in the dry corner earned after a vicious round of mud tag, and close your eyes. Outside, the wind mutters. The puddles whisper. And somewhere, a kid slides past on a stolen roof tile, cackling into the night. Mud shoes off. Sleep shoes on. The cough starts before dawn. Not yours for once. This one is deeper, wheezier, echoing across the hut like someone trying to breathe through wet wool. It's your uncle again. His breath rattles like a wooden bucket rolling down a flight of stairs. You sit up, still wrapped in your damp blanket, and squint across the dim, smoky room. He's awake. Barely. His eyes are glassy, and his skin has that grayish hue that never means anything good. Dampness doesn't just cling to the walls. It clings to lungs. Illness in mud season is so common. It's practically an extra roommate. Colds, flus, chest sickness, marsh lung, you name it. Anything that thrives in moist, chilly, unwashed environments has found a welcome home inside the rib cages of your fellow serfs. And once it starts, it spreads. You move to stoke the fire, hoping he might loosen the tightness in your uncle's chest. The wood hisses resentfully. Half of it is still damp, but it catches eventually. A few flames flicker up like tired dancers. You place a pot of water above the heat and throw in some dried mint leaves. Not because it helps much, but because mint tea feels like it should be helpful. Historians still argue whether most medieval illnesses were primarily caused by poor hygiene or simply bad luck. The answer, of course, is both. Add in the fact that no one knows what germs are yet, and you've got a population that thinks disease might come from cold winds, swamp spirits, or a neighbor giving you the evil eye. Someone suggests leeches. You politely decline. Quirky fact: in some regions, it was believed that cutting a rooster's comb and dripping the blood into a stew could cure respiratory illness. This sounds horrifying to you, but your neighbor swears it cured her cousin's cough, or at least distracted him for a few days. You opt instead for onion poultices. You mash a bulb into a steaming rack and place it on your uncle's chest. The smell is a potent. The pigs edge away. Disease isn't just miserable, it's dangerous. A minor cough can turn into something fatal by the third frost. The problem is, no one has the strength to rest properly. There's always a chore, always a leak, always a muddy obligation that requires moving, lifting, breathing poorly. You feel a tickle in your own throat. Not again. To protect others, you wrap a cloth around your nose and mouth, a rare moment of medieval masking. Not that anyone else follows suit. Featherina sneezes dramatically in protest. Later, you venture to the village healer. She's not a doctor, because the concept of doctor doesn't exactly apply to your social class. But she knows her plants. Her hut smells like vinegar, herbs, and something slightly burnt. She listens to your uncle's symptoms and nods sagely. Marsh rot, she says. Need a lung purge. You try not to panic. The prescription: boiled thyme, mashed garlic, a shot of mead, and bizarrely, a poultice made from old bread soaked in vinegar and applied to the soles of the feet. You don't argue. You gather the ingredients. Back home, your uncle swallows the brew, gags once, then sighs. You begin massaging his feet with soggy bread. Somewhere, a medieval angel earns its wings. Despite all the sickness, people keep moving. That's the real danger of serfdom. You don't stop. You can't. Even the sick must feed animals, haul water, fix that one wattle panel that collapsed last night in a fit of damn drama. One old man in the village has fashioned a sort of cane with a bell tied to it. Every time he walks, it jingles, partly to announce his approach, partly, he says, to warn the spirits I'm not dead yet. Some believe certain stones ward off illness. Others carry dried flowers in their tunics, not for the smell, but for their cleansing aura. You start tucking lavender behind your ear, not because you believe it, but because it makes your pillow smell less like pig. Your own cough has started now, soft and persistent. You chew a piece of resin to soothe it. Doesn't work, but chewing distracts you. You think of stories told around the fire, tales of magical springs that cured any illness, of wise women who could draw sickness out with a silver spoon and a black feather. None of those things are here. Here you have garlic, steam, and a long, long season ahead. The pigs huddle closer tonight, radiating heat like smelly radiators. You don't mind. You'll take warmth in any form. You lie down again, clutching a warm rock wrapped in cloth to your chest like a makeshift hot water bottle. You dream of dry air, clean sheets, and the ability to take a full breath without coughing. You dream of a hut without leaks and a season without sickness. But even in the dream, someone sneezes. You roll over, whisper a tired goodnight to your uncle, and close your eyes. You're half asleep, curled near the fire, when the bell rings. Not a loud bell, just a soft, echoing ding from somewhere in the foggy distance. The church bell. It rings every morning, every evening, every holy day, every time someone dies, or is born, or might be dying but hasn't quite committed yet. You sit up, groggy blanket clinging to you like damp seaweed. The pigs stir. The chicken sneezes. The goat, for reasons known only to itself, is chewing on a sock. Outside, the rain has paused, but the sky is the color of old pewter, and the air is cold enough to freeze a thought mid-sentence. You wrap your cloak tighter and trudge toward the chapel, following the muffled shuffle of your neighbor's feet along the squelchy path. The village church stands like a giant stone refrigerator at the edge of the commons. Built from roughly cut blocks and mortar by the faith of very cold people, it's the one building in town that doesn't leak. Mostly. The roof is high and pitched, and the windows, small and filled with cloudy glass or oiled parchment, lend just enough light to make the shadows seem busier. You file inside, nodding greetings. It's warmer than outside, but not by much. Your breath still fogs. The benches are wooden and warped. The altar is simple, dressed with a faded cloth and a modest crucifix. And off to the side, a tiny brazier gives off more smoke than heat. But you're not here for comfort. You're here because it's Sunday, or Thursday, or St. Mudrick's Day. Honestly, no one's sure anymore, just that you come when the bell rings. The priest, Father Arno, is already mumbling through the liturgy, his breath pluming like incense. He's wrapped in 3 layers of robes, all of which appear to be wool and, ironically, damp. His voice is steady, but his nose is red and dripping like a leaky gutter. Still, he speaks with authority. He reads from the book, then delivers a short homily about suffering and humility, 2 things you've got plenty of. He reminds everyone to be grateful for rain, for without it, the earth would not yield. You try to feel grateful. You do, but your shoes are squishing again, and you're pretty sure the pew has splinters older than the priest. Historians agree that the church was the central pillar of peasant life, not just spiritually, but socially. It was where you learned news, sought help, and occasionally received alms. And during the dampest, dreariest seasons, it was also one of the few places that felt like a change of scenery, even if it meant sitting in cold silence for an hour while a chicken laid an egg under the altar. Quirky fact: in some places, chapels doubled as livestock shelters during the worst weather. Not officially, of course, but a few goats sneaking in for a sermon was not unheard of. Father Arno says nothing about the piglet currently sniffing the holy water. You listen as he invokes blessings on the village, the harvest, and your immune systems. He sneezes at the end. Everyone mumbles an amen. After the service, people linger. Not because they're particularly pious, but because it's drier in here. Barely. You warm your hands near the brazier, catching scraps of whispered gossip. Someone's thatch collapsed again. Someone else's ox slipped in a puddle and landed on a goose. You help sweep the floor, as is customary. Bits of straw, ash, and 1 small apple core. You leave the chicken. She seems to like it here. Outside, the cold returns like a slap. But your soul, if not your fingers, feels a little less soggy. You make the slow trudge home, feet heavy with wet. The path is worse now, trampled into an unholy paste by 50 pairs of devout muddy shoes. Your makeshift planks help, but one of them snaps halfway home. You limp the rest of the way in philosophical silence. Back at the hut, the fire is still going. Someone's added more cabbage to the pot. The goat has not moved. Your uncle is asleep, snoring like a bellows. You sit, draw your cloak tighter, and think about Father Arno's words, about patience, humility, and the promise that spring will come. Historians still debate how much comfort religion truly brought to serfs. Was it faith, fear, or habit that filled the pews? But you don't spend time pondering that. Faith is woven into your days like straw into the roof, sometimes brittle, sometimes moldy, but always there. You murmur a prayer for your feet. You toss a dry twig into the fire. You breathe. Outside, the bell rings again. No one moves. It's just a reminder now, a soft echo that the world beyond your damp walls still turns. You fall asleep to the smell of smoke, cabbage, and faintly sanctified straw. The wind tonight is louder than usual, like some great grumbling spirit has taken up residence in the trees just outside your hut. It moans, rises, then dips again, carrying with it the sound of branches scratching, shutters creaking, and every now and then a very distinct knock that no one seems to be causing. You pull your blanket closer, glance toward the darkened corner of the hut, and decide not to check it. Not tonight. The thing is, when you live half your year in the wet gray soup of mud season, with sick animals and sicker uncles, your mind starts to wander. And wandering minds in medieval villages tend to walk right into ghost stories. That cold draft could be a cracked wall. Could also be the spirit of old Tilda, who died last winter after slipping in the pig trough and swore she'd haunt anyone who laughed. You definitely laughed. There's no shortage of these tales. Swamp witches, marsh spirits, restless ancestors who knock at windows with their soggy, bony fingers. You don't always believe them. But on nights like this, when the fire is burned low and your breath fogs the air, you also don't rule them out. Historians still debate how seriously medieval peasants took their supernatural stories. Some argue they were just metaphors, cautionary tales for children. Others believe these beliefs shaped daily life, even influencing how and when people planted crops or ventured out after dusk. You believe exactly enough to never go to the outhouse alone after dark. Quirky fact: some villagers used carved turnips, yes, like proto-pumpkins, to ward off evil spirits near their doors. You tried once. The pigs ate it. The ghosts were unimpressed. Tonight, your cousin decides to tell a story. She starts quietly, voice low, face half lit by the orange embers. It's about a woman who wandered into the marsh one evening and was never seen again. Only her shoes returned, full of wet reeds and tiny bones. You clutch your blanket tighter. Then your uncle, half asleep, chimes in with a raspy, "Nonsense. She ran off with the fishmonger." You laugh, tension breaking, but not completely. There's still that feeling, like something's watching. And in mud season, the line between drafty corner and spectral presence feels especially thin. Sometimes people claim to see lights in the marsh, flickering, dancing little flames that lead travelers off the road. Will-o'-the-wisps, they're called. Scientific minds will one day explain them as swamp gas. But here and now, they're the whispers of the dead or the tricks of forest sprites with nothing better to do. A child once followed them and didn't come back for 3 days. When he did, he spoke nothing but riddles and rhymed everything for a week. He's fine now, mostly, though he does stare too long at ponds. You remember the time a neighbor poured ale around their doorframe to ward off spirits. It didn't help, but it did attract every goose in the village. Yes, your family sticks to safer methods, hanging dried herbs over the hearth, leaving out a crust of bread near the door, never saying the names of the dead after dark. You follow the rules, mostly, except that one time you mocked the swamp hag. Your cousin still blames you for her rash. It's not just ghosts. There are feelings here. You've stepped into places where the air turns heavy, your skin crawls, and even the goats refuse to walk. You call them bad spots. You avoid them. Even your animals seem to know. One night, all the pigs stood perfectly still, ears forward, staring at a shadow in the corner of the hut. You lit a candle. Nothing was there, but you slept with garlic under your pillow for a week after. The sounds are the worst. You hear whispering in the rain, creaks that come from above, though nothing hangs there. The occasional knock from the inside of the door. Once, in the dead of night, you heard your name, clear as day, right next to your ear. Everyone has their own story. Everyone swears they once saw something. And even if you don't believe it in the daylight, the cold and damp of mud season has a way of softening the rational part of your brain, letting just enough space for fear to creep in. Tonight, the wind rises again. A door slams open across the village. You hear shouting, then laughter, then nothing. Someone mumbles a prayer. Someone else clutches their amulet, a carved bit of oak shaped like a wheel. You check the corners of the hut one more time, just to be sure. Then you nestle deeper into the straw, tucking your feet in, covering your ears against the wind. You pull your blanket high until only your nose peeks out. Safe. The fire crackles. The pigs twitch. A loose shutter knocks softly against the wall. You close your eyes, And when the wind says your name again, you pretend not to hear it. You wake up to a gentle, rhythmic snort just inches from your ear. It's the pig again. She's pressed up close to you, all warm breath and muddy hooves, like the world's least romantic bedmate. You sigh, roll over, right into a pile of straw that may or may not have been the goat's bed last night, and blink groggily into the dim morning haze. Romance in mud season is the complicated. For starters, you smell like cabbage water and wool socks. So does your sweetheart. Everyone does. It's hard to feel flirtatious when your foot wraps are molding and you haven't had a proper wash since before the last frost. And yet, somehow people fall in love. They sneak glances between chores, pass each other the better ladle of stew, leave little bundles of wild herbs in each other's baskets. Love, like mold, find a way. You think of your neighbor, Elric, who once tripped in a puddle and landed face first in cow dung. His beloved, instead of laughing, helped wipe off his beard with her sleeve. That's romance, medieval edition. There's something oddly tender about affection when everything else is miserable. A smile shared while scrubbing laundry in a frozen stream. The brush of hands while thatching a roof. The way someone holds the door flap open a little longer so your socks don't get as wet. It's the small things. Always the small things. Historians still debate how much choice serfs had in love and marriage. Some argue most unions were arranged for practicality, land, dowries, alliances between families. Others point to folk songs, poems, and old court records that suggest affection bloomed often, even under muddy boots and a lord's watchful eye. You'd argue that when two people willingly choose to share a straw bed in a pig-scented hut, that's about as real as it gets. Quirky fact. Some medieval villages held spring festivals where couples would try out living together before committing to marriage, a sort of betrothal cohabitation. If things didn't work out, no harm done. If they did, you simply told the priest and blessed matrimony and an extra serving of stew at the next feast. Your own courting began during last year's hang. She was strong, quick with a scythe, and even quicker with her sarcasm. You admired both. She teased you for your crooked foot wraps. You responded by braiding a small daisy chain and leaving it in her basket. 2 weeks later, you were sharing her fire. Now, months later, she's curled up next to you, snoring softly under a tangle of wool and straw, one arm draped protectively over a bundle of onions. You love her. Evenings are the best. After the pigs settle, after the children stop yelling, after the stew is gone and the fire is low, you share quiet conversations. Sometimes it's about the future, how nice it would be to have a roof that doesn't leak. Other times it's nonsense, which chicken looks the most judgmental. It's always feather Ina. Sometimes you just sit together and say nothing at all. There are no flowers right now, no fancy gifts, no moonlit dances. But there's warmth. There's shared work. There's splitting the last crust of bread and watching each other chew. Your parents say this isn't how love used to be. They talk about songs and promises, about dances in dry fields and feasts with meat and mead. You nod politely, but you're not envious. Their love had sunshine. Yours has mud, but it's no less fierce. This morning, your sweetheart hands you her cloak, slightly drier than yours, and insists you wear it while hauling firewood. You protest. She glares. You obey. Later, you return the favor by making her a hot drink, just warm water with crushed mint, but it's the best you can do. She drinks it and smiles. Your heart does a little cartwheel inside your chest. That night, you both help patch the wall again. She holds the wattle frame while you smear the daub. You fall into a rhythm, slap, press, pat. Occasionally, she flicks mud at you. Occasionally, you don't mind. You finish the work just as rain begins again. Together, you duck inside and laugh at how filthy you are. When you lie down, your arms tangled, you don't mind the pigs or the goats or the damp blanket. You're warm, and so is she. No sonnets, no silk, just shared chores, shared silence, shared socks. You drift off listening to her breathe, thinking maybe love doesn't need dry floors after all. You wake up to the sound of hooves in snow. Not fresh snow. This is the old stuff, crusted with ice, layered with mud underneath. It crunches like stale bread beneath the heavy footfalls of your neighbor's mule, who seems just as thrilled as you are to be awake before sunrise. You peek out through a gap in the hut's wall. A man in a fur-lined cloak is riding up the path, flanked by two younger men carrying ledgers. Oh no, it's that day. Tax day. Yes, even when the world is frozen, the air tastes like soot and frost, and you haven't seen your own knees in weeks, someone somewhere still believes now is the perfect time to collect dues. The Lord Steward, wrapped up like a bundle of smugness, dismounts and begins barking names. You sigh, roll out of your blanket, and prepare yourself to part with the few precious things you were hoping to stretch through spring. It's not money. You don't have that. You pay in goods, bundles of straw, jars of pickled turnips, dried onions, a sack of barley, maybe a hen if you're truly out of options. You carry your offerings in a basket that's been repaired more times than you can count. Historians still argue whether winter and mud season taxation was deliberate cruelty or just a staggeringly inconvenient bit of administrative planning. Records show some manors did pause collection during the harshest periods, but others, driven by debts or pure tradition, insisted on pressing peasants even while their pigs slept indoors and their roofs leaked like riddled boats. You reach the steward. He looks you over the way someone might appraise a slightly squashed apple. "You're late," he says. You consider throwing a turnip at him. Instead, you bow stiffly and hand over your meager bundle. He inspects it, pinches the onion, and mutters something about quality. You resist the urge to mutter something back. Behind you, Gertie is arguing that the rain washed her entire store of oats into the ditch and that she can only pay in moldy flaxseed and sorrow. The steward isn't moved. You know this man. He's not evil, just employed. But he carries a little too much pride in his neat boots and dry cloak. You watch mud splatter on his hem and feel a sliver of joy. Your cousin, who has nothing left to give, tries a trick. She offers a carved wooden spoon and a blessing for his goats. He takes the spoon. The blessing, she mumbles under her breath, probably wasn't very holy. Quirky fact. In some parts of Europe, peasants resorted to creative gifts when tax season caught them empty-handed. Baskets of snow labeled holy water, or boxes filled with bark and labeled future fire. These didn't go over well, but they made great stories. Back at the hut, you tally what's left: a half bag of turnips, some dried peas, the bottom of the pottage pot, which is mostly grease and hope, and one extremely angry chicken. You remind yourself that this is how it works. You farm the land, tend the animals, chop the wood, boil the cabbage, and then the Lord, who has never once set foot in your swamp of a village, takes a portion. In theory, he protects you. In practice, you protect yourself from damp socks and ghosts, while he writes poetry. The fire is nearly out again. You chop more wood, your hands raw from rope burns. Every log you split, every leak you patch is done knowing part of it won't belong to you. And yet you adapt. Later, the steward returns, this time muttering about road conditions and stuck wagons. You offer to help for a fee. He glares. You smile. You and a few others tie ropes to the Lord's cart, wedge planks under the wheels, and spend 2 hours pushing and cursing in unison until the thing finally lurches free from its muddy grave. You're rewarded with a nod. No coin, just a nod. You head back, soaked, sore, but still standing. That evening, your sweetheart brews a cup of warm barley water with a pinch of salt. She hands it to you silently. You sip and feel it spread through your chest like the idea of spring. You murmur thanks. She kisses your forehead. The pigs grunt their approval. Later, you talk softly about the injustice of it all, how the Lord gets more during lean years and less during plenty. She shrugs and says, "Let him eat pottage." You laugh until you cough. Then silence. The kind that wraps around a room like an old coat. You think about all the people in the village just trying to stay dry, stay warm, stay fed, while some man in a manor decides if the stew is too thin to count. You fall asleep still wrapped in your muddy cloak, hand resting on the handle of the wooden spoon your cousin never delivered. You dream of turning it into a sword. You've spent the morning hauling firewood uphill through sleet, and now you're lying face first in a puddle that smells suspiciously like pig. Not because you tripped. Okay, you tripped. But because today is the unofficial beginning of the Mud Season Olympics. There are no medals. There is no glory. But there is entertainment, which, during this season of perpetual dampness and despair, is even better. It all starts with a challenge. Who can carry the most logs without falling? You take up the dare, chest puffed, arms loaded. 6 logs. Maybe 7. You barely make it 4 steps before a hidden slick of chicken droppings sends you flying sideways into the exact same spot Gertie slipped yesterday. At least now there's a bit of cushioning. Your cousin wins the round with 5 logs and a smug grin. She does a celebratory dance. It's mostly stomping. She slips anyway. These games are not planned. They just emerge, like mildew on the walls or mushrooms in your foot wraps. Some events are practical, mud-hauling races, fire-starting sprints, fastest pottage stir with a limp. Others are pure chaos, like the hay bale leap, where you try to vault over a pile of half-rotted straw without kicking a goat. Featherina is the judge, and she's notoriously harsh. Historians still argue whether peasants made time for play during hard seasons, or if survival left no room for games. But you've watched your neighbors barrel roll into ditches just to make each other laugh, and you're confident that humor wasn't a luxury, it was armor. Quirky fact, some medieval festivals included games like pig chases, greasy pole climbing, and even mock battles with sticks and padded sacks. Your village is less organized, but no less enthusiastic. This afternoon's headline event, the firewood dash. Each contestant grabs a bundle of wood, runs it from the edge of the forest to the central hearth, and returns without face planting. It's not about speed, it's about not becoming one with the mud. You line up next to Gertie, who's limbering up like she's in the Royal Guard. You nod once, and then go. You charge forward, knees high, breath puffing in clouds. The mud grabs at your feet like hungry ghosts. You wobble, nearly lose a log, but recover. Halfway back, your foot finds a hole. You lunge, sacrificing a boot to the bog gods, but you cross the finish line victorious, one sock flapping in the breeze. Everyone cheers. Even the pigs look impressed. The next event is less graceful, the blanket tug, which involves 2 opponents, one tattered wool blanket and a dangerously slippery patch of ground. You square off against a wiry lad from the next hamlet over. He looks like he's never bathed, which is to say he blends in well. The match is intense. There's grunting, slipping, and a lot of creative insults involving turnips. You eventually win by pretending to sneeze, then yanking the blanket while your opponent hesitates mid with you. Later, everyone gathers near the largest puddle for the main attraction, the Slide of Doom. This is less of a game and more of a hold my stew and watch this situation. A shallow hill, freshly drenched, becomes a slippery runway. The rules are simple. Sit, push off, and scream all the way down. Bonus points for style. And not breaking anything. You go last. Someone has set up 2 hay bales at the bottom as a safety wall. You push off, picking up speed immediately. The wind whips through your hair. The mud coats your tunic. You hit the bales with a satisfying thump and bounce backward into the arms of a surprised goat. 10 out of 10. Afterward, you all sit around the fire, wet and shivering but grinning. Someone passes around a flask of questionable liquid that burns like holy water. You sip and feel the fire inside finally catch up with the fire outside. Someone begins carving a medal out of bark. They present it to you with a bow. It says Champion of Mild Competence. You wear it proudly. These games, this laughter, the competition that requires no strength, no prizes, just a willingness to get dirty, it all reminds you that you're not just surviving. You're living in the only way peasants can when the skies are gray and your socks squelch with every step. It's easy to forget that, under all the weight of taxes and sickness and rotting roofs, you're still allowed to be silly, to play, to be a person, not just a pair of hands and feet dragging firewood. Even Father Arno stopped by earlier. He didn't play, but he did laugh. He even smiled when someone gave him a muddy turnip as a consolation prize for best smile and a wet cloak. You fall asleep that night with a sore back, a scraped knee, and dried mud behind your ears. But your heart is light. Your medal hangs beside the hearth, swinging slightly in the draft. Champion indeed. The wind has calmed for once, and you're awake before dawn, not because you have to be, but because your feet are actually warm for the first time in days. This calls for celebration. Or at least a few more minutes lying still in stunned, hushed gratitude. The reason? You've cracked it. The secret. The hack, if you will, a bundle of straw inside your foot wraps, changed twice a day instead of once. You've basically reinvented medieval footwear science, and you allow yourself a quiet smirk in the darkness. Welcome to Surf Life, Life Hacked. In a world where your entire existence can be undone by a slightly colder wind or a poorly aimed goat sneeze, finding even a minor improvement feels like discovering fire all over again. And over time, your village has developed a whole catalog of tiny, brilliant, often disgusting workarounds for surviving the season of damp. Like your fire starting technique. Everyone else piles twigs and dry straw, well, less wet straw, and prays to Saint Smoke Plume. You use a pine cone dipped in pig fat. Lights in seconds. Smells like a roasted forest, but hey, warmth is warmth. Quirky fact. In some medieval households, dried animal dung was carefully collected and stored for fuel. Not just in the steppe or far-off lands here, too. You scoffed once. Then you tried it. Now you're a believer. It burns slow, steady, and only moderately makes your eyes water. Your hut has other upgrades, too. Someone, probably your sweetheart, stuffed dried moss into the wall gaps. It smells faintly of earth and feels like insulation from the gods. You've also re-angled your straw mattress so the rain drip from the roof now misses your face by a full inch. That's engineering. Historians still argue how inventive peasants really were when it came to adapting. Some claim most just suffered in silence, accepting misery as divine design. Others insist villagers were quietly brilliant, repurposing everything, innovating constantly with whatever they could pry out of the mud. You very soggily fall into the second camp. You've even devised a new water-catching system. With your cloak tied between two sticks outside and a bucket placed carefully underneath, you can collect rainwater that doesn't taste like chicken. It's revolutionary. Gertie, naturally, has gone one better. She built a gutter system using hollowed reeds and broken pottery. Now water flows right into her wash basin. She named it the Pipe of Wonder and guards it with intensity of a dragon watching gold. But the most legendary surf hack? The dung sealant. No, seriously. When mixed with ash and old stew, animal dung becomes a kind of medieval caulk. You stuff it into the leaky roof, the wall gaps, even the holes in your shoes. It dries hard, sticks forever, and if you squint hard enough, looks almost like plaster. You've plugged 3 leaks this way. The hut still smells awful, but at least it's consistently awful now, instead of randomly damp and awful. You pass on these tricks. To the kids, to newcomers, to that one guy who keeps losing his boot in the same puddle. There's a kind of pride in it. Not just surviving the mud season, but outwitting it one squelchy step at a time. Tonight, you're helping your sweetheart sew a new tunic. Not because you have fancy linen or bright dyes. No, this one's made of old grain sacks and thread pulled from unraveling rope, but because it fits. And it's warm. And she even stitched a tiny pattern near the collar. A goat. It's oddly charming. As she sews, you repair the fire grate. A bent bit of iron you salvaged from the blacksmith's junk pile, now repurposed to hold the logs at the right angle so they dry faster and smoke less. It actually works. You both sit there side by side, tools in hand, surrounded by pigs, ash, and the occasional clump of moss falling from the ceiling, and you feel rich. Not in coin, not in status, but in warmth, in resourcefulness, in shared triumphs over nature's endless damp assault. She leans over and says, "We should write these down." You nod. Not because anyone can read. Well, maybe Father Arno if he squints, but because it's a beautiful idea. A manual of mud. A sacred text of cleverness. A chronicle of cabbage-based insulation and turnip oil lanterns. You imagine someone centuries from now discovering your notes and whispering, "Genius." Later, outside in the cool air, you test your newest idea. A cloak treated with rendered fat and crushed charcoal to repel water. It works. Kind of. You still get wet, but the rain beads a little first, and then slides off with just a hint of theatrical flair. You walk through the village like a soggy superhero. The kids want their own versions. You agree, on the condition that they help gather firewood without complaining. One agrees. Two grumble. One says he saw a ghost in the woods and refuses. You lie down that night in your slightly warmer, slightly drier hut, wrapped in your improved cloak, feet tucked into the straw and moss bed you perfected. There are still leaks. Still chills. Still nights where your toes go numb. But you have tools now. Tricks. Hacks. And in this age of mud, that's the closest thing you've got to magic. You wake up to silence. Not total silence. There's always the distant grunt of a pig, the occasional splatter of something unpleasant hitting the mud outside. But the wind has stopped. The rain has paused. Even the leaky roof isn't dripping. You lie there, not daring to move, as if your body knows something has shifted. And when you finally peek out from under your blanket, you see it, a faint glow at the edge of the sky. Not fire, not frost, but light. The thaw has begun. It's not dramatic. No choir of angels, no sudden explosion of flowers or trumpeting from the trees. Just a subtle change in color, in air, in the way the world smells. Less rot, more dirt, less mildew, more hope. You sit up slowly, rubbing the stiffness from your back. The floor is still damp, but not wet. You can step without that miserable squelch beneath your heel. You shuffle to the door, push it open, and blink into the pale, unfamiliar sun. The village looks the same, gray, soggy, hunched, but somehow brighter. A child is poking at a snowdrift with a stick and laughing. Not sarcastically. Actually laughing. You can't remember the last time that happened. Your sweetheart joins you, blanket around her shoulders, eyes puffy with sleep. She squints into the light, smiles, and whispers, "It's still ugly." You nod, but slightly less soggy. She links her arm with yours and leans into your side. It's still cold, but your shared body heat is enough. You stand there for a long time, just breathing. Today's chores are the same: hauling water, chopping wood, trying to stop the goat from chewing the new mattress, but they feel lighter. You're no longer fighting a losing battle against the elements. You're cleaning up after a long, exhausting siege. The mud, of course, is still everywhere. But it's changing. Thinner. Slipperier, yes, but no longer infinite. You spot the tops of some green shoots poking through by the fence. Weeds, probably. But they look like miracles. You walk the edge of the field and press your foot into the ground. It doesn't vanish. It compresses, holds your weight, then releases. The earth is breathing again. You whisper a quiet thank you to no one in particular. Historians still argue about how peasants mark the turning of seasons. Was it the calendar, the church, or the smell of fresh dung thawing under the snow? You know exactly when it happens, when the mud begins to give up. When your tunic dries before nightfall. When your feet finally feel like yours again. You strip off your outer cloak and lay it on a rock to dry in the sun. The pig joins you and sprawls out like it's on vacation. You don't even mind. You close your eyes, lean back, and let the light wash over your face. Quirky fact: In some medieval traditions, people threw a small thaw feast to celebrate surviving the worst of the mud. It wasn't fancy, mostly pottage, flatbread, and maybe a bit of cheese if you were lucky. But it was enough to gather the village, share stories, and breathe easier. That evening, someone starts preparing a pot of stew with all the best scraps saved over the last few weeks. You contribute your last turnip. Gertie brings 3 dried apples. Unheard of generosity. The kids gather sticks for the biggest fire you've had since Michaelmas. Everyone comes. You sit in a rough circle, bowls steaming in your hands, cheeks pink from the cold and the firelight. Father Arno recites a poem he probably made up on the spot. Someone sings a folk song that's mostly about cows getting stuck in bogs. You join in on the chorus. And when the stars appear, clear and sharp for the first time in weeks, you lie back on the softening earth and watch your breath rise up into the sky, clean and white. You think of everything you've endured: mud, cold, hunger, ghosts, taxes, soggy love, angry chickens, and you feel a swelling pride that doesn't need words. You did it. Not alone. Never alone. But you made it through. The fire crackles. The stars blink. The pigs fart, but gently. You rest your head against your sweetheart's shoulder and exhale. Spring is coming. And now, with the fire burning low and the sky soft with the promise of a new season, your body begins to settle. The world hasn't changed overnight. Your feet are still tired, your hut still leaks in places, and tomorrow's chores won't do themselves. But the heavy weight of mud season is beginning to lift. Slowly, gently, you let that feeling sink in deep into your bones. The quiet satisfaction of having endured something relentless. Something that tested you not with drama or disaster, but with 1,000 tiny discomforts, each one demanding your patience, your creativity, your humor. You close your eyes, listening to the hush that fills the village when the wind has finally run out of things to say. The walls creak softly, the fire pops once more, and even the pigs seem to breathe a little easier tonight. You feel warmth on your skin, in your chest, maybe even in your toes for once. A rare thing, a good thing. Let yourself enjoy it. Let the rhythm of your breathing slow. Let the images of that long, muddy season drift away, like puddles drying under morning sun. You're safe now. Dry enough. Fed enough. Loved enough. And if tomorrow brings another storm, well, you've got tricks. And firewood. And a chicken who will definitely judge you, but never leave your side. For now, there's nothing to do. Just rest. You've earned it. Good night.